If you're watching this video, then hopefully you, like me, love Skylanders. That being said, the Skylanders series kind of burnt out pretty quickly. It exploded onto the scene with its first installment, Spyro's Adventure, and then immediately burst into having a new game every year for 6 years straight, releasing Giants, then Swap Force, Trap Team, Superchargers, and eventually Imaginators. And come the time Imaginators came around, I think it's fair to say we were all thoroughly burnt out on the series. Maybe I don't speak for literally everyone here, but certainly I could already feel by Swap Force, like I didn't suddenly hate the games or anything, but I just had a bit of fatigue from them. I'm glad that they were successful, but on the other hand, I do think it was pretty ridiculous in hindsight for them to keep releasing new games every single year without more time to let them sit, especially considering just the ludicrous quantity of figures you needed to be able to access everything in these games. And yeah, I'm dancing around it, but I'm not about to ignore it. Obviously, the reason why these games frankly got way more Skylanders made than was necessary was money. I'm not blind to that, but I just think that the games also ended up really, really good games. And I think that most people who have actually played them understand that. I mean, hell, I'm not about to say it's good, but you know right now the video game industry is in a pretty terrible place where to make good money off your game, you basically have to engage in really pernicious tactics. You know, freemium games, gacha games, that kind of stuff. And so hey, if what I'm buying into is just a game where you buy it, you play it, you have the game, but you can get extra characters by buying figures, sure, I'll take that. That being said, it kind of poses the question, did the series get worse as it went? Or do we judge it unfairly because of the fact that there was so much content packed into such a small amount of time, only for the franchise to practically disappear 6 years later? Well, that's a question that I hope to answer eventually, but it's a bit too big for just one video. So what I'd rather like to do is go one video at a time, one game at a time, talking about each game in the series and what I thought about them as a whole, which of course means we have to begin where it all started, Spyro's Adventure. I want to make it clear, though, that this isn't really an explanation of what Skylanders is. I mean, if you're here, I imagine you already know. So it might seem like I'm coming at this from a weird angle, but I feel like it makes more sense to analyze this game from this angle if you already are a fan of Skylanders. At the end of the day, I'm not going to analyze this as a standalone game, I'm rather going to analyze it in comparison to the sequels. Which again, might seem strange, considering when this game was made, they probably had no idea there were even going to be more Skylanders games. But at the end of the day, we do live in the world now where there are 6 of these games. So, say you skipped the first one because you weren't around by then, and maybe only jumped on the train by Giants or Swap Force, why should you come back to play Spyro's Adventure? And I think probably the reason that is both the simplest to say, but also the hardest to truly all-encompassingly understand, is the fact that, well, for just about everyone who plays a lot of Skylanders, the biggest problem with the series is it's slow. At the end of the day, I'm not delusional. I know it's a game ultimately made for kids. The games are pretty easy. They're really fun, but they're pretty easy. And in the spirit of being easy and kid-friendly, in a lot of these games you both move slow and enemies telegraph their attacks for light years before they finally actually try and swing at you. That makes it hard for when you've played these games a lot to find moments in the game which actually feel really fast-paced and exciting. It can still feel very satisfying or relaxing to play, but not really give you that thrill you might be looking for. And while in general the series isn't well suited for that, certainly the first game was at the very least the best at trying to satisfy that thrill. For one simple reason. For whatever godforsaken reason, in basically every new installment of the franchise, they further slowed down the game, even though for more dedicated fans, one of their biggest problems with the game has always been the slow pace of the gameplay. For whatever reason, they just kept insisting on that slowing down of the pace. Now, this is not by any means to say that Spyro's Adventure is a fast-paced game per se. Even in Spyro's Adventure, if you gave me the controls, if you gave me the keys to the kingdom, I would absolutely speed up every character's animations and attacks to make for a more fast-paced, skill-expressive, action-packed kind of game. That being said, if you want to play a Skylanders game and you want it to feel fast, then honestly, the first game is probably your best bet. Because it's the first game, no character's mobility has been nerfed yet, and there are even examples of exploits or bugs that weren't patched out until later games that you can use in the original to do absolutely crazy cool things with certain Skylanders, be it insta-kills with Whamshell, or reaching hyper speed with Warnado. I have another video on that if you want to know the details about that. But there's so many little weird oddities that just for whatever reason got removed in later games. So as much as it might seem like everything I'm talking about is small potatoes, honestly, when I go to play Spyro's Adventure 99% of the time, it's not because I want to play a Spyro's Adventure level. When I come on to play Spyro's Adventure rather than any other game in the series, it's almost always because in every future game, those characters just don't feel right. They're slower, their options are more limited, they have more lag on their attacks. They just can't do things like they used to in their debut game. And most of the time, all these characters get to compensate are damage buffs. And don't get me wrong, those can help, but not only are they usually not really a big deal, but on top of that, because they're just damage numbers, they only really affect how strong they are, but not how fun they are. If the character's fun has been destroyed, you aren't going to fix that by just making the numbers bigger. So while this might seem like a strange place to start and spend so much time focusing in on, I actually think it's one of the biggest reasons I feel that you should play Spyro's Adventure if you haven't played it yet. Now, I already alluded to the fact that the port of the game that you play does matter. I'm going to recap this quickly because I've already mentioned it a couple times, but essentially the Wii version of the game is effectively the definitive version of the game, which is ironic because for basically every single other Skylanders game, the Wii version is the worst version. However, the first Skylanders game was not only the least technically demanding, but also was always made to be a Wii exclusive, meaning they had to scramble to make the PS3 and Xbox ports in like a month. So they got a company called Xpec to do it, and that's why those ports are known as the Xpec ports. And as you can imagine, those rushed ports are a lot worse in quality than the original.
At last, it is time. After untold ages of darkness, light. At last, it is time. After untold ages of darkness, light.
That being said, I've already said that some of this really cool tech you can exploit with certain characters is also exclusive to the Xpec port. So I suppose there's a bit of give and take. That being said, while there's definitely cool and funny stuff you can do in the Xpec port with certain characters, especially Warnado, certainly as an experience, the Wii version is miles better. I'm going to be quite honest here. I love this series, and you know that usually I'm going to be quite positive about it. So I really wanted to stick when I tell you this. Spyro's Adventure, the Xpec port, is fucking ugly. It looks horrible. I mean, it plays fine, but the appearance of the game is just dark and grimy and gross, and it just looks wrong. Meanwhile, the Wii version, I mean, what a glow up. Now, in fairness, the footage you're seeing here is from Dolphin, so it is the Wii version. However, Dolphin does allow for upscaling, so the textures might be a little higher quality than they would be on an actual real hardware Wii. But other than that, this is pretty accurate to what you would see playing the Wii version versus a PlayStation 3 or Xbox version of the game. And I wanted to bring this up basically because while I've already covered a lot of the differences in gameplay between the Xpec ports and the Wii ports, in the video I was talking about, I didn't really talk about some of the visual or experiential differences. And I'm not gonna lie, it really was a beautiful moment when I finally replayed Spyro's Adventure after so many years, this time on Dolphin. because I did play the original game as a kid on the Wii. It's just that when I came back, the only emulator that I knew that had emulated Portal was the PS3 emulator, so I played the PS3 or Xpec version instead. And it was only later that Dolphin got its own emulated Portal, so now I could play both versions. I say that to say that when I first went back to play the PS3 version of Spyro's Adventure, I genuinely thought to myself, wow, I remembered Spyro's Adventure being like the least visually appealing game of the bunch, but I didn't remember it being this ugly. Man, I must have had rose-tinted glasses like crazy. Nostalgia must have made me absolutely blind. And then coming back and playing it on Dolphin, playing the Wii version of the game, it was insane how beautiful it looked in comparison. And I'm not gonna lie, I can't tell if it's the fact that RPCS3 is a bit more of a demanding emulator, or that it's a bit more unstable when it comes to Spyro's Adventure, but a lot more stable when it comes to Giants. But when I go and try and play Skylanders Giants on RPCS3, it runs very smoothly. But Spyro's Adventure, it usually runs smoothly, but every now and then it just looks choppy or laggy or slow. Whereas I never had that option on Dolphin. As I say, I literally have the upscaling on and it still isn't lagging. So I'm not sure if that's just an emulation thing or if it's also true that the Wii version just runs much smoother. Maybe both things are true, but either way, it just feels so much better playing the Wii version. To be honest, while I have taken an interest to finding aspects of the Xpec version that people don't know about that make it pretty cool, things that are exclusive to it, at the same time, man, do I see why people like to be picky when telling people, no, you've got to play the right version, you've got to play the Wii version. Because, yeah, I think I might have to agree. If I was going to tell anyone to go back and play the first game, I'd have to make sure they were playing the right version. Enough of that though, what about the levels? That's one of the main things that's different about every Skylanders game is of course they all have a different story. So they have different levels and different layouts and etc. And Spyro's Adventure is actually kind of notable for that. You see, Spyro's Adventure actually has 22 levels, and then 4 Adventure Pack bonus levels. Technically speaking, this means that the first game actually had more levels than any other game in the entire series, which is kind of hilarious to think about. That being said, it is a bit of an illusion. You see, it depends on whether you're really bothering to go get all the collectibles, of course, but well, if you're just sprinting for the exit, most of these levels are no joke 3 minutes long, which might sound like me putting down Spyro's Adventure, but actually, I like that. I mean, I don't even think this is a controversial take from what I've seen, but just to be clear, a lot of people don't really like the fact that around Swap Force they started deciding that every level had to be 45 minutes plus in length. And sure, maybe they started adding checkpoints to levels to help even things out, but I think most people preferred having a lot of short levels over a small selection of extremely long and tedious levels. That being said, I think there is a sweet spot, and I have to say I think that sweet spot was found in Giants. I do think that Spyro's Adventure does just have slightly too short levels. Some of them really are over in a matter of minutes, whereas it feels like a lot of the levels in Giants are a much more 8 to 10 minute sort of deal, which feels like a nice sweet spot. On the topic of levels, this might be something that's a bit more of a me thing, but I have to admit, I don't know exactly how much you guys just played through Skylanders once and absolutely loved it, but you know, you just wanted to play it once and you're done. Or how many of you are the type to replay the games a whole bunch. Because for me personally, there were certain levels that I would revisit over and over and over to test out new characters, try out every upgrade path, thoroughly really look into everything. So I'm not going to lie, usually, of course, I'd play every level in the game trying to beat it, and maybe at some point I'd try to beat it a second time all the way through, but 90% of my playtime I would just be replaying the same selection of 4 or 5 levels that I think are particularly good from the main story. Usually ones close to the end of the story since, you know, typically a lot of the last levels in the game have the best rewards in terms of money and are the most difficult, and for me, it's not a one-to-one, but for the most part, the more difficult levels are usually the more fun ones. And I must admit, this is a problem I've always had with Spyro's Adventure. It's not that it's got a bad selection of levels, but in my opinion, a lot of the game's best levels are towards the start, and a lot of its worst levels are towards the end. and that is annoying because it means there's plenty of selection for good levels for you to play. It's just that you're going to be playing on levels which practically give you no money for upgrades, and on top of that, they're all going to be piss easy. Leviathan Lagoon is absolutely one of my favorites from the early game, but I also like Oil Spill Island and the sort of Earth levels with the Cyclopses, the boss against the Earth Golem, and Treetop Terrace is another favorite of mine. But unfortunately, again, all these levels are from the first half of the game, so in all of them, the enemies are pushovers and the money is pocket change. Getting closer towards the end, it's not that there's no good levels, but pickings are slim. The tech levels, in my opinion, were all kind of a slog. The first Undead level was pretty good, but I thought the second one with the Robbie Rotten gimmick with the zombies that could only die to fire was quite tedious and annoying. And I think the final Undead level has its moments, but it's got so much dull, tedious puzzle solving that makes it really hard to come back to those levels to replay because of the fact that every single time you have to redo the puzzle to replay the level. I have similar problems with the Fire Element levels where there's a lot of time to spend just pushing blocks or walking through mazes rather than actually fighting enemies. And don't even get me started on Archean Armory. My god, that level should have been the coolest level in the game, and it's probably my least favorite level in any Skylanders game ever. I hate it. Not to mention how much of a cop-out it is that we don't really get a proper magic level. Well, I say that. We get Quicksilver Vault, and that's certainly one of my favorite levels in the game that I like to revisit a lot, but listen, I'm a big fan of the color purple. So I was hoping there was going to be a very purple magic themed level. Instead we get a light blue one, and I'm like, oh, surely the next magic level will, actually have magic theme to it. And then instead we get an Archean level. And don't get me wrong, I like the Archeans, but let's not pretend. Yes, they're magic and technology, but they're much more about robots and stuff than magic. It really just felt like, okay, I got out of the tech levels only to be thrown into another tech level. One of the reasons why I'm moaning so much about this is because I want to say that I genuinely think one of the biggest things that Spyro's Adventure has going for it is that I think the best level, no contest, in Spyro's Adventure is Chaos's Lair, the final level. And I think that's a big deal because, to be honest, I don't know what it is, but I feel like a lot of the later Skylanders games, the final level isn't that good. But I cannot tell you how many times I have replayed Chaos's Lair. I'm pretty confident that by now, the amount of times I have played that level is probably in the triple digits. And I still love it. I still think it is the best level in the first game. And it's unfortunately yet more reason why it's important to play the Wii version, because for some godforsaken reason, they gutted the level in the Xpec version and removed half of it to instead add a bunch of sections where you have to sit still on moving platforms just waiting to arrive at the next section of the level, and it genuinely takes so long that 38% of the level is sitting on moving platforms and waiting and doing nothing. My best guess as to why the hell they thought this was a good idea is maybe they were having some sort of technical issues where they couldn't load in too much level geometry at once. It was causing issues on the ports, and so instead of fixing it, they just thought, we don't have time. We're just going to delete this part of the level and put this thing here to take you to where you should go. But if they really had to do that, could they have not just put a teleport pad down? Did they really have to make us sit there and wait for nearly 3 whole minutes of doing nothing but standing still? Not to mention, all of this has been beating around the bush before I get to, honestly, one of the best things that Spyro's Adventure has going for it. I'm sorry, I have no idea if what I'm about to say is blasphemous to some in this community. I know that there are certain games where there are certain final bosses that are very well beloved by the fandom, where I maybe am not so big a fan. I'm just going to come out and say it. The final boss of Spyro's Adventure is the greatest boss fight in the entirety of the Skylanders franchise. It's not even close.
Foolish apprentice! You played right into my hands! So what if you've managed to survive and take all of the eternal sources? Big deal! If you restored the so-called core of light, it's all for nothing! Because now you have followed me into my realm, and here I am, all-powerful, and you are nothing! I have to laugh. I have to! Because even though you somehow managed to not get squashed, you now face the most hideous, and powerful of all my minions! Meet the same minion who destroyed the Core of Light, and will do so again. Meet the beast that sent Eon to his well-deserved bodiless oblivion! Meet my Hydra!
The reveal of the Hydra, the only being powerful enough to destroy the Core of Light, the fact that the fight is so long it becomes its own entire level attached onto the end of Chaos's lair. If I remember correctly, this is a 5-phase boss fight. They really went all out for this. The fact that it brought back not only spells that Chaos has used in his water, fire, life, and undead encounters, as well as Skylanders he's used, and I haven't even got into that yet. I am absolutely mortified that future games completely abandoned the idea of enemy portal masters summoning their own dark, evil Skylanders to fight against you, and they have all the same moves you have, and you have to fight against them. I loved these encounters, and I can't believe they never made a return in the franchise. That is such an enormous waste of potential. The only point at which they returned is you did get ambushes in giants in elemental zones where you would be attacked by these things. But it's not the same, man. Nothing in any other future Skylanders game will ever feel the same as it did the first time I was there trying to beat the final boss. With nothing more than Gil Grunt left in my collection, running for my life from an undead Archean knight with a blade made of cursed undead flames, while trying to dodge the fire breath of a teleporting phoenix, and trying to circumvent the barricades that Chaos's Zook was setting up, and firing shrapnel all over the battlefield, bobbing and weaving, dodging between all the projectiles all over the screen while trying to fight back against these enemies from all sides, all while they still continue to send sharks, fireballs, everything at me. It felt so cool, man, and no future game really made a boss fight that felt as difficult as this one. Well, I say that, maybe if you play on Nightmare mode, but not real difficulty if you know what I mean. If there had been boss fights that have been made more difficult than this, it's been by cranking up the numbers, making it so you just die ludicrously fast or the boss takes forever to kill. This boss, though, was sincerely hard. It wasn't hard because it had huge numbers, it wasn't hard because it could one-shot you, it was hard because it made you have to panic and deal with everything at once. And I'll admit, I'm getting into the mood a little bit, I'm hyping it up a bit more than is real. Obviously, it's not that tough. While it was very close, I did beat him on my first attempt. It was just a very long attempt. And I did that with nothing more than the starter pack and Terrafint at my side. But it is not even a question to me whether there is any other point in the franchise that made me feel like I was experiencing that much of a fair and honest challenge. Honestly, the only thing I gotta say is not even really a complaint that is this game's fault, but rather future games. I am absolutely mortified that future games just kind of forgot about the Hydra. Like, I know we defeated it at the end of Spyro's adventure, but I thought the Hydra was a badass final boss, and I can't believe that it basically just is like it didn't exist after Spyro's adventure. I think it gets a small little reference in Superchargers with there being a water mission about defeating a baby Hydra that Chaos has, but other than that, they kind of do just forget the Hydra existed. That being said, I've been doing a lot of glazing this first game. What about it is worse? I haven't talked that much about what's worse about Spyro's adventure, because a lot of it is kind of obvious and just first game syndrome. Because it's the first game in the series, it obviously has the least Skylanders. And while I did say it technically has the most levels, and I think there's some upsides to the fact that it has more levels that are shorter, yeah, as I said, the levels are by far the shortest, and in total, it honestly probably does have the least story content. Well, maybe Giants has a little bit less, it's honestly a bit hard to say, but they're both pretty short games. And of course, I already mentioned that graphically, while it certainly looks a lot better on the Wii version, it's certainly true that future games were a bit more impressive. But, I mean, everyone expects all that from the first game. So what about something that you might not expect? Well, I'm not sure if I'm going to be alone on this one. And I must admit, even I have a bit of a hard time explaining this, but I feel like I'm not sure what it was, but there was a massive upgrade in the writing department of the game from Spyro's Adventure to Giants. Because I'm going to be quite honest, when I first played Spyro's Adventure, I hated Flynn. Like, I knew that it was the joke was that he was full of himself to a ridiculous degree. I knew it was a joke, but the fact it was a joke didn't kind of stop me from actually hating him and just not finding it funny. Just generally, I really don't feel a whole lot for most of the characters in the first game. The only character in the first game I really liked was Hugo, but even then, there's not a whole lot about him. I don't know, it just seems like he's the only character who isn't a little bit of a dick. And even then, Hugo keeps randomly beefing with random other NPCs you find along the way, and I mean, in fairness, usually it's a bit of a misunderstanding or someone else starts it, but even then, it's like, God, can there just be a moment where the NPCs aren't dicks to each other for a moment? What's going on here? And again, I know that everywhere it's supposed to be funny, but I don't know what to say. It's just not. Like, it's just kind of unfunny and uncomfortable for me. I remember genuinely, when I first started playing Giants, I was mortified at first to see that Flynn was going to be much more of a main character from now on. But then I was pleasantly surprised to see that come Giants, I kind of stopped hating Flynn. I started thinking, wait, he's actually funny now. And it didn't take long for me when I started playing Giants for the first time to realize I was laughing every level. And I thought the writing was on fire now. But if I'm completely honest with myself, as much as I think that there's things to remember about the first game that were really good, the writing definitely isn't one of them. A lot of the characters in the first game aren't quite as memorable. Again, for me, it's mostly just Hugo, and I liked T-Bone, but that was about it. Again, this feels like a bit of a weird one to talk about, because ultimately, none of these characters are insanely deep. It's not like Skylanders is a very deep game. But at the end of the day, there's this nice vibe to a lot of the future games, where ultimately, while there's joking around, and sometimes they overdo it to a bit where it might become a bit cringy, you get that we're all friends here vibe, and it's just quite nice. And honestly, it makes it easier to laugh at some of these moments, but there's just this weird feeling for me in Spyro's Adventure. Like, everyone in the game feels like they're just forced to be there together, and that no one really seems to get along. And again, it just feels weird that they constantly seem to want to play that for laughs, and I don't know, to me it just always comes off as kind of awkward. Obviously, ultimately, it doesn't really ruin the experience of playing the game at all, but I guess it's just if you were going into this game hoping to get some more classic interactions from the cast of characters you love and all that, hear some more funny jabs and things like that, I don't think you're going to get what you want out of this game. Now, this might seem like a bit of a strange thing to dedicate a whole section of a video to, but I want to take a moment to briefly talk about collectibles. Now, for the most part, Spyro's Adventure is pretty standard when it comes to collectibles. In fact, there are some things that are definitely worse about the first game. For example, legendary treasures have always been a bit of a weird one in these games, constantly jumping back and forward between just being cosmetic, actually doing something, or being near useless. And, well, I guess it was there from the beginning. Because legendary treasures in the first game don't do anything except give you money. And you might think that that sounds, okay, that's boring, but I mean, money's good, right? That's pretty good, I guess. Except, well, they don't give, like, a lot of money at all. They give you 50 money per level you're on. As in, the level 1 legendary treasure gives you 50 gold. The level 3 one will give you 150, etc. And that might seem like it at least makes some sense, but especially considering that the legendary treasures are not necessarily more well hidden in the later levels. In fact, ironically enough, I'd argue most of the earlier levels have the most well hidden legendary treasures. It feels really strange that some of these collectibles can be genuinely some of the most cryptic and difficult to find collectibles in the entire franchise's history, and then your reward for finding them is, here's 100 gold. And that's just it. That's all you get. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. I'm going to be very, very direct with you here. I wanted the glory of getting this game 100%ed completely legit, so my initial plan was, years ago when I first went to 100% this game, that I was going to find every collectible on my own. Now, if you have not played Spyro's Adventure, you might not think that would be all that impressive. I mean, most Skylanders games, 90% of the collectibles barely take any thought to find, and 10% of them you might have to find some tricky alternate solutions to puzzles, or actually have to think a bit more about, or maybe you have to check some obscure corner of a level you could easily have walked past. But for the most part, you don't necessarily have to be super smart, just thorough. However, legendary treasures lived up to their goddamn fucking name in Spyro's Adventure. Some of them, in fairness, were like your normal collectibles, where you basically just have to realize, there is 2 ways to go here, but we're being told to go one way. What if we go other way? Treasure! But then the very next level, the legendary treasure will be the most cryptic, unhinged shit you've ever seen in your life. From getting eaten by a leviathan on purpose at a very specific secret location to get one legendary treasure, to having to activate secret invisible elemental gates in other levels, some of these legendary treasures are actually unhinged in how difficult they are to find. And I found every single one legitimately, except one that I wasted hours of my life searching for. And the funniest part is, Perilous Pastures, the second level in the game. I'm not kidding, this level is barely 3 minutes long. And yet I could not find the legendary treasure. I could see it, but it's on the other side of a gate with seemingly no way to open it. The only way that seemed to make sense is there is a turret that you use to open another gate to end the level that's in front of you. So if you could turn the turret to the side, you could blast the gate open, but you just can't do that. For hours and hours, it was strange, but the only thing I could think is that at one point in the level there is a water gate, which is pretty close to where the legendary treasure is. And it has a relatively complicated block pushing / teleport puzzle. And considering that I could not find a single way to get to the other end of that gate, and there seemed to be no way to open the gate, it made the most sense to me that you would teleport to the legendary treasure. So even though this is not usually how legendary treasures work, you usually can't teleport to a collectible that is outside of an elemental gate, I thought, well, surely it's got to be in the elemental gate. And after hours and hours of replaying the same fucking level over and over, I gave in. I just gave in. I finally decided, God damn it, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. I'm not going to figure it out. And so I looked it up. And, well, just in case you guys still want to find it yourselves, I'm not going to say what it is right now. All I'm going to say is, the image you're seeing on screen right now, the answer is in the image. And I'm also going to follow that up with the information that, trust me, you are never going to figure this shit out. But if you want it kept a secret, I'll leave it up to you whether you look up the solution or not. All that being said, is the fact that the legendary treasures in this game can sometimes be far more cryptic a good or a bad thing? And both, honestly. Certainly the one I was just complaining about is a great example of a legendary treasure that becomes so bullshit cryptic that I don't even think it's cool anymore, it's just annoying. However, most of the legendary treasures in this game that are more cryptic, I actually appreciated how much more I had to think outside the box to be able to find them. And it certainly gave the levels a lot more replay value when it genuinely took multiple attempts to figure out what I was doing wrong and why I couldn't find it. I don't know, I could see it being annoying for some players, but for me at least, I kind of liked how creative it forced me to get when it came to thinking about the level design. Another thing that I really missed from the first game that future games kind of ditched was just how important your element was. You know, obviously you still have elemental gates and elemental zones in future games, but they just feel so much less meaningful. Especially because a very obscure fact about the first game is the fact that almost every element in the game had something that only it could do. And this was a feature that was basically ditched in future games, which in fairness, I don't completely blame them because it was very cryptic, but I feel like the main reason it was cryptic is because it was never explained or even hinted at. And if they just, well, explained it to you, then it probably wouldn't have been that bad of an idea. But for those of you who don't know what I'm on about, things like water Skylanders can all swim in water, allowing them to reach areas and levels that other Skylanders can't. Earth Skylanders can all break rock without needing a pickaxe. Niche, but sometimes important. Fire Skylanders were capable of killing Robbie Rottens without needing candles, and also could walk on lava unharmed. But I will admit, a lot of these special properties were kind of hidden away. I genuinely am pretty convinced at this point it's most likely that a lot of these properties were early ideas they kind of scrapped the further they went through development, and some of them just managed to stay in and some of them were just kicked out. For example, you know how whenever you go to an elemental gate, you build a bridge based on your element? Like a bridge of bones for an undead character or a big fine bridge for a life character? Did you know there's actually a secret area in the game in which there is one of those bridges you can build that is not in an elemental zone? It's just in a normal part of the level, and you still have to be the right element to build the bridge. That kind of hints at the idea that they probably weren't going to have those things be exclusive to elemental gates at first, and it was probably midway development they changed their mind. And if you do take that in fact into account, then it means there's a lot of other things that likely were intended to be element exclusive. For example, I kind of wonder if the little tornadoes in a lot of the air elemental zones were intended to be things that only air Skylanders could ride to reach different locations, considering otherwise, what's the difference between them and teleport pads? Beyond gameplay differences though, another thing that was really cool about elements in Spyro's Adventure was the fact that, well, as I've already kind of alluded to, levels were actually themed around them. Crazy, I know. But seriously though, think of future Skylanders games. How rare is it that you actually see levels substantially themed around the elements of the characters? It basically never happens anymore. I actually think it's really a shame that they don't do that in future installments. I loved that in Spyro's Adventure we got to see these environments modeled after all the different 8 elements. Not to mention, I know this might sound small, but I love the fact that the Core of Light is something you are building over the course of the entire story, and that every single mission you complete when you're beating the game for the first time, the hub world slowly grows and you see the Core of Light expand, getting more and more parts, getting more and more elements comprised into it. I think it's just really, really cool and a great way to really sell to you that sense of progression and accomplishment. Not to mention, this might sound like a bit of a weird way to put it, but you might bring up the fact that the first game didn't really have a gimmick. You know, Giants had Giants, Swap Force had Swappers, Trap Team had the Trap Masters, you get the point. And of course, Skylanders Spyro's Adventure, just being the first game, didn't have anything like that. But as strange a take this might sound, I would say elements in the first place were the gimmick of the first game. And I'm not gonna lie, as basic as this might sound, they were probably one of the best gimmicks. Not only because they were one of the only gimmicks that remained a staple of the series all the way through, but also because, I mean, let's be real, one of the main problems with a lot of gimmick Skylanders is the fact you were forced to get them to access certain parts of the game. And especially in cases where there was only one gimmick Skylander of the correct element, it was frustrating having to get a certain Skylander of a certain element to be able to reach this part of the game you wanted to access. Whereas in the first game, you had 4 options in every element. If you weren't a hardcore collector, like probably most people who played this game, it wasn't really like you got locked out of the game. You already got 3 of the 8 elements in the starter pack. Most characters came in packs of 3s, so you could get another 3 elements in a single 3-pack for £15. And then you'd only need 2 more, probably get another 3-pack, and there's probably an overlapping element in there. And there you go, you've got 1 of every element, and you can now access every single part of the game. You don't have to get that many Skylanders, but you do have to get a little bit more than just the starter pack. And for the most part, you can just pick whatever you want in the element. I know that might sound really basic, but there are just some future games where it really just hit the point where it's like, okay, then we got to the part of the game where I can't play the Skylander I want anymore. Now I have to swap to this specific Skylander because it's the only Skylander that meets all the conditions to be able to reach this area. Oh boy, I sure love having to swap Skylanders every 5 seconds to not miss collectibles. And no appraisal of Spyro's Adventure's levels would be complete without including the adventure packs, as Spyro's Adventure was one of the few games to get 4 adventure packs. 4 bonus levels after the game's already finished. Now the levels are numbered, but if I remember correctly, I don't believe the levels are actually numbered according to the order they were released. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Pirate Seas came first, then Darklight Crypt, then Empire of Ice, then Dragon's Peak. This is mostly in order, except for the part where Empire of Ice is supposed to be the first one of the 4 if we're going by level numbers. So, I don't know, maybe there was some reason why Empire of Ice's figure was more difficult to make, I don't know. But either way, I'm going to talk about it in that order, and I'm going to try and keep it quick. Pirate Seas was the first one I played, and it's a fine adventure pack. but there's a reason why fine is the word I choose. There's nothing really wrong with the level, it looks nice, it's got a good layout. The elemental gate in particular is very long, and I mean that in a good way, it's a lot of content in there. And the card matching minigame, while basic, is pretty fun, not to mention the voiceover is absolute gold. I mean, how can you not love this?
Pirate curse! Schooner! Peachy-boo!
However, the main thing that holds back the level is that 1, the matching cards games make up like more than half of your entire playtime of this level, and 2, the level ends with a special sort of event where you control a ship and shoot cannonballs at the defenses of the Pirates Island, which is a pretty cool idea, but it's just kind of, you know, it's another one of those sections you don't really ever want to replay. It's not truly awful, it's just, it is kind of just mashing the A button and slowly swerving a little bit left and right. It did get in this banger of a joke though.
Ye beat me once, your hornswoggle, but now your toughest challenge lies dead ahead. If you want her back, you'll need to beat me poop deck.
Fun fact about Pirate Seas as well, if you didn't know, because of the fact that Giants and Spyro's Adventure are made in the same engine, Giants is the only game that got the adventure packs from the previous game ported into it. Now you probably knew that part, that you could play Spyro's adventure pack levels in Giants, but what that means is more interesting. Chill and Thumpback are new water Skylanders in Giants, and if I remember correctly in Giants, there isn't a single area in the entire normal game where you can swim, meaning that Thumpback and Chill have swimming animations that you cannot see in the base game of Giants, ever. The only place in the entire game you can see the swimming animation for Chill and Thumpback is Pirate Seas. Just a fun little tidbit if you'd never thought about that. It's especially a shame because Thumpback has this special thing as well while he's swimming where he can shoot starfish out the top of his blowhole. I don't actually think it does anything, it's just kind of funny. Next up is Darklight Crypt, which... I'm going to try not to spend too long gushing about it, but actually just the best adventure pack level that has ever been introduced in any Skylanders game, hands down. Like, don't get me wrong, because it's an adventure pack level, it's an entirely self-contained level. But to say it's a self-contained level, it feels huge. This level not only introduced Batterson, who would actually be a somewhat recurring character in the series, and had plenty of enjoyable lines.
That's better. Better.
Not to mention, if Batterson didn't exist, then we wouldn't have Hatterson in Giants. But beyond that, we also got a villain exclusive to this level, Oculus.
Hello, I am Oculus. In case you haven't noticed, I'm a giant eyeball.
But beyond that, we got a level with a really cool Ghost World Real World gimmick, loads of new mechanics that change the way lock puzzles worked, as well as introducing brand new enemies that appear only in this level and no other level in the entirety of the game. I'm pretty sure Darklight Crypt is also the longest level in Spyro's Adventure by a long shot with the most beefy playtime. Come to think of it, I'm trying to remember if it's the only level that actually has you able to go in and out of houses in Spyro's Adventure. That's pretty normal in Giants, but in Spyro's Adventure, I don't think that was really a thing. Between the ramparts, the parapets, the mazes, the elemental gates, the ghost village with all the different ghost NPCs, all with their own personalities, and the cherry on top, while basically every single adventure pack other than this one ended with a bit of a wet fart, this adventure pack actually created a brand new, completely unique boss fight just for this level against Oculus. And then on top of all of that, as if that wasn't enough, I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, Darklight Crypt is the only level in the entire series which actually changes food items in the game once you beat it. Once you beat Darklight Crypt, you unlock the ability to see pies as food on the overworld randomly spawn. So many little details, so much love and attention to detail just in this one level. Definitely the best adventure pack by far. But of course, we gotta go straight from the best to the worst. Empire of Ice. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Empire of Ice at least had the decency to introduce brand new unique enemies only for its level, like the Ice Ogres. But other than that, it is a bland and forgettable ice level. Its main gimmick is that it ends with a quote-unquote boss fight against a giant wall where you man a cannon. But as cool as that might sound, if you've played it or if you even just watched this gameplay, you know how tedious and boring this ending of the level is. Basically, the only redeeming feature of this level I can say is just a cool little tidbit. Haldor over here is a beta design for Double Trouble, which is good reuse of what would have otherwise been unused assets. But that brings us to the final adventure pack, Dragon's Peak. And this might be a bit weird, but I gotta say, Dragon's Peak is frustrating for me, because I do think it's a decent adventure pack, but I feel like it should have been the best one. But it just really disappoints at every turn. Once again, it's got its own self-contained story with its own characters. Once again, it's a pretty long level, but not as long as Darklight Crypt. And once again, the level is chock full of enemies that only appear in Dragon's Peak. Between the Dragonettes, the Boom Fiends, and even these Black Chompies, I think they become more normal in future games, but I'm pretty sure in Spyro's Adventure this is the only level in the game with Black Chompies. Especially considering how beautiful this level looks, and the fact that it has the best music in the entire game bar none. What's the issue here? Well, the issue is, unfortunately, this level is jam-packed with sections where the gameplay is sitting and waiting. Obviously playing into the whole like flying, Dragon's Peak, etc. There's a lot of very sparse dotted about islands with a lot of distance between them, where you almost always have to use bounce pads to get across or fly on Flavius. And don't get me wrong, using bounce pads wouldn't be that bad if it weren't for the fact that almost all of these bounce pads, you have to wait for multiple of them to be in the correct position before you can proceed. So the gameplay amounts to waiting. Not to mention, one of the main hazards you'll see all over the place in this level are dragon statues that breathe fire. This fire can't be avoided, all you can do is sit and wait for it to go away and then walk through when it's not there. So again, even more mechanics that just force you to sit around and wait. And then there's the actual flying segments themselves, which aren't awful, but are very, very slow-paced and very, very easy, and there's no way to go faster in them. So while this technically isn't just sitting around and waiting, you are technically doing something. You're being given way too much time to do something extremely easy and not being given the option to do it faster if you like. So you may as well just be sitting around waiting whenever you're in these sections. As a result, this level that otherwise would have been probably one of my favorites in the entire series, unfortunately feels like a little bit of a disappointment, just because of how much of the gameplay takes place at a complete standstill. But I could have forgiven all that if at least at the very end, we got a chance to fight Vathek. Which they really, really lean into that and make you think you're going to get a cool, sick boss fight against Vathek at the end of the level, just like you got for Oculus in Darklight Crypt. Only for them to pull a fake out and go, haha lol, you thought you were actually getting extra content. Nah, that's the end of the level, bye.
These minions are worthless. I'll do it myself.
Be gone, fuck!
Oh, okay.
That was easy.
At the very least though, if we're talking physical figurines and not emulation, Dragon's Peak is a good adventure pack to get, literally just because of the fact that this is the level where you find the winged hat. The hat that grants you a 12-point speed boost, the most powerful speed boost you can get in Spyro's Adventure and Giants. There are some slightly stronger speed boosts in Swap Force, but of course you can't bring hats from Swap Force into previous games. So you'll probably notice that almost every Skylander I'm playing with at almost all times will have the winged hat on. Lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about the quality of the Skylanders in the first game, because that's something that I think a lot of people can agree is something pretty good about the first game. Well, I say that. My opinion's a bit mixed on this. You see, on one hand, whenever I hear people talking about why the first game Skylanders are so great, it's basically always just saying, oh, well, like, they're classics. Oh, well, like, they've been there since the beginning. You know, I don't really hear a lot of, well, this is actually something they used to do in the past that they don't really do anymore that was really good with their characters. It seems like a lot of the time it's just purely built off of recognition and sort of blinding yourselves to the characters that didn't really hit the mark and only looking at the ones that were the best of the best. I mean, of course, everyone loves Stealth Elf, and characters like Drobot, Drill Sergeant, and Chop Chop were all badass. But at the end of the day, that's a pretty small selection of characters, and even within that selection, I've always really liked Drill Sergeant, but I know that a lot of other people don't. If you're talking about the entire selection of 32 Skylanders available in Spyro's Adventure, as a whole, I'd actually have to say that Spyro's Adventure actually has some of the most forgettable and boring character design. And I mean, I'm not even saying this despite Skylanders I hate, because half of these aren't even necessarily Skylanders I dislike. But I mean, look at Whirlwind, look at Sonic Boom, look at Sunburn, look at Voodoo, Look at Bash. So many of these characters are just so forgettable and bland in appearance. And whether they're any different in actual gameplay varies. Some of them actually do have deceptively nuanced gameplay to them, even though they appear very basic on the surface, but others really are just very bland and basic. So before I really thought out how I was going to approach this video, my gut feeling was that I was probably going to tell you that honestly, the first game Skylanders are a little overrated. The people kind of give them more credit than they deserve, mostly just because they're the originals, and so they have this increased recognizability that kind of acts as a free pass through some of their shortcomings. That being said, when I formed that opinion, it had been a bit since I've played Spyro's Adventure. I'm not gonna lie, when I'm playing Skylanders casually purely for fun, 90% of the time I am playing on Giants or Swap Force. And so while I've played plenty in Spyro's Adventure in the past, it had been a while and I'd become a little distant to it. And so playing it far more while recording this video and preparing for it has kind of reminded me of some of the things I forgot that were good about these characters. And I guess this is the big one. This is why it feels like a lot of early Skylanders characters have a magic to them that later games don't really replicate. Not even saying that later games Skylanders got worse, kind of depends which time period you're talking about. But at the very least, I do think this one area is an area that did degrade in quality. I feel like in Spyro's Adventure, there was more of an effort, it felt, to make characters with coherent movesets, with 3 moves that make sense to put together on the same character and synergize with each other. That's not to say that they never do that in future games, but it does feel like in future games there's a lot more examples of Skylanders that might still be fun or might still be beloved, but at the end of the day, when you look at their moves, they feel like 3 really cool but completely separate ideas that belong on different characters. You often find Skylanders where the 3 moves don't work together super well, or maybe you got multiple moves that all work fine, but one move makes the other 2 redundant, so you just spam the one move that matters. But one thing I really didn't appreciate until coming to replay this game a whole bunch was just how rare that is in the original cast. Not to say there's 0 examples of it, but for the most part, the original cast's movesets make sense. This is one of those things where, because it's a pretty big sweeping claim about a group of 32 different Skylanders, to really holistically address this would take a long time. So the best way I can do it is just to zoom in on one character that I think is a great example of what I'm on about. Or maybe even better, one archetype. Because I think there's an archetype of character that's seen as very basic. And it is a pretty basic archetype, but it actually has some of the wackiest, goofiest design problems in the entire series, I would say. Those being brawler characters. And that's because, well, since you need to get close with these characters to land hits, you've got to get within enemies' attack range. However, you also move slowly in Skylanders, as I've already mentioned, and so that makes it really hard to be doing bobbing and weaving and dodging mid-fight. So if you can't really dodge effectively, and you can't play from a safe distance to avoid getting hit, how do you actually fight enemies as a brawler Skylander without getting hit? And I think the answer to that is kinda you don't, at least when they're badly designed. When they truly are nothing but a brawler with no tricks up their sleeves, you kind of do just get in their face, mash the button, do as much damage as you can, and hope they die first. But I don't really think that's great design. I mean, sure, maybe that's satisfying button mashing, but I don't think that's the best. On the other hand, let's take a look at the face of the brawler archetype in Spyro's Adventure, Terrafin. Terrafin has been around for so long as such a staple Skylander that it seems at first weird to consider his design unique. But it kind of is. It just doesn't feel that way because it became the template for every future brawler. Having an Earth Skylander that is essentially a shark that swims on land rather than water to act as the game's de facto brawler is actually pretty smart. Because it's like I was saying earlier, brawlers have this problem where you need to get into the danger zone to be effective as a brawler, but you also don't really have the tools to bob and weave, and then the game isn't fast enough to really accommodate dodging at close range combat. So you have to find workarounds, and they did that with Terrafin. As simple as the gimmick may be of being able to jump into the land and swim through it to become invincible temporarily and then jump back out, that is your bobbing and weaving mechanic. That is why Terrafin is a boxer. And even his tertiary attack, the little mini Terrafins that bite enemies from a distance, it's certainly his least effective attack, but it gives him a ranged damage option, so it literally can't be useless, because there will always be situations in which you would like a ranged damage option. But on top of that, Because it's a brawler character, you don't want the ranged damage option to become the character. So by making the mini Terrafins a slow but effective damage over time, they encourage you to use them sparingly, but to use them. If you spam them, you're not going to get a whole lot of extra damage. Whereas if you just use them once or twice, you're going to get a decent amount of damage while simultaneously still being able to punch enemies and swim through the earth. At every level, Terrafin is designed to work around the limitations of the Brawler Archetype, and that is why he is the face of the Brawler Archetype in Skylanders. Because he's one of the few brawlers that kind of overcomes all of the issues with the archetype. Hell, I'm not even really a fan of Bash, but I gotta give it to him. It was smart to make his secondary attack the stone pillars. The fact that they still need to be hit by a primary attack to launch the rocks means that you still have to use both attacks, and on top of that, having roll of course means he does at least have decent mobility so he can do a little bit of dodging and weaving. Even Slam Bam, I don't think Slam Bam is done the best, but at the very least it makes a lot of sense for his secondary attack to be a freeze that stuns enemies, because once again, that gives him an opening, that gives him a window to go in. Meanwhile, I know I'm being blasphemous here, but here we go. Wallop, one of the most beloved Skylanders in Trap Team, but can I be honest? I kind of feel like it's just because you button mash with him and you see the numbers go crazy and it's like, I don't know, I never really got this character. I don't get why people love him so much. And it kind of seems like with Wallop, what is your mechanic to not get hit? And I feel like the only answer is, oh, just do so much damage they die before they can hit you. And I mean, I guess that works because, you know, it's Wallop and he does stupid damage, but that's not very interesting or exciting. So yeah, I have to say, I feel like the design of the characters was much more well curated in the first game, even if the abilities weren't quite as crazy. To be honest, I kind of just want to throw this one in here at the end, but I've got to say, they were knocking it out of the park with the life element in the first game. Like, every life Skylander is amazing, except like Stump Smash, but even then I don't dislike Stump Smash, I just think he's okay. But Stealth Elf is a fan favorite, Camo is a blast, and Zook, honestly, I think is severely underrated. Meanwhile though, I've got to say, man, was the magic element a disappointment in the first game. I mean, you got Double Trouble, I guess, but Voodoo I felt was a very, very forgettable character. Like, Voodoo could be deleted from Spyro's Adventure tomorrow and it would probably take me a couple years to notice. Of course, Spyro took up one of the coveted 4 slots for the magic element despite having nothing to do with magic. I get that he's a magical dragon, but what dragon isn't magical in mythology? I mean, ultimately all he does is he breathes fire, so I don't see how he's not a fire element, but whatever. And that only leaves Wrecking Ball, which... Wrecking Ball is Wrecking Ball. Wrecking Ball is like hardly even a functional character, I'm not gonna lie. I don't know what they were smoking when they made them. I haven't given it an insane amount of thought, but I gotta say, if I had to say gut feeling off the top of my head what I think the weakest Skylander in the entire franchise is, I think I would probably say Wrecking Ball. That being said, I would say they were more good than bad. Elements that usually disappoint were actually pretty good in the first game. When I think of the elements that are usually the most boring in most games, I think of the fire element and the earth element. But actually, a lot of the fire and earth Skylanders were pretty good in the first game. And while the life element probably still takes my pick for favourite, tech is a close second. I don't think they missed with a single character in the tech element. With all that said, what score am I going to give Spyro's Adventure? I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. It was a great start to the series, and I really don't think it's much further behind a lot of my favourite games in the series in quality. It's just, with so many of my very favourite characters coming from Giants, with so much more spectacle in the games going from Swap Force onwards, yeah, it's certainly true that the first game can feel like a bit of a downgrade to go back to. That being said, I still can't give it lower than an 8, simply because at the end of the day, for the characters that did debut in this game, these are the best versions of these characters. Again, it's really hard to put into words without making it a 50-hour-long extravaganza, but every character in the first game plays better than in future games. And you really just can't replace that feeling of just feeling so much more responsive, so much more good to play. With all that said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one when I get around to Giants. Goodbye.